And there's something that I've also seen, and I wonder is like where, and we'll talk about men because we're here with men, and my podcast is aimed at men, is using power and leadership as a way to prove worth to the world. This is something that I quite commonly see is like, okay, if I can get power, then I can get the love and adoration that maybe I never got from my mummy or my daddy, but I can siphon that through from the world outside of me, which can be quite a dark motivation, I find, to accumulate anything really.
100%, 100%. I'll, in the interests of honesty and clarity here, and for your listeners, I don't mind sharing this because at some point it's going to come out in a book or some memoir somewhere anyway. One of the things I had to wrestle with I do therapy. I've been doing therapy for the last 5 years. I'm quite evangelical about it as well. And the reason being is because it was not the only, but the most powerful tool that allowed me to unpack 50 plus years of behavior and habits and an environment that had shaped who I am. And one of the things I realize is I'm a rescuer. So I'll go online and I'm like just giving information out. My wife's like, what is wrong with you? Like, why is anybody going to pay you? And you're giving out all this free information and what have you. And I've always been, even when I did youth work, when I worked in education, mentoring and helping people in tech and what have you, I've always been like, do you know what? I'm going to go in the spirit of abundance. I'm just going to just give. And if it means that, at the end of the day, I may miss out on an opportunity, so be it. But one of the reasons I realized that I did this is, and I really did explore this through therapy, is one of the reasons why my default is as a rescuer is because I always wanted somebody to rescue me. Mm-hmm. So because I'm outspoken, because I've always been the rebel, because I've been the big mouth, I can get the quick wit, I can get the joke, I can understand the concept. People around me have thought, well, he doesn't need help from me because he's got it all together. People will say to me, look, David, a guy said to me the other week, he goes, I'm running a speaker course because I know you've been speaking for the best part of 30 odd years. So I don't know if I'm out of pocket. I'm like, dude, I'm always learning. Like, I'm not the finished article. Yes, I've been doing it for many years, but I'm still always learning. And I realized that, again, when people think you have it all together and then you end up rescuing, who comes to rescue you? And, and a big part of my learning was, and I share this with men quite a lot as well, was the realization that who I wanted to rescue was the child, David. But I'm a man. And so let me understand what that rescuing looks like. Let me confront it and put it to bed, but recognize that as a man, my behavior has to be a reflection of my adulthood, because I can't be reverting back to 11, 12-year-old David every time I'm in this space where, I need this conversation. So again, as I say, the conversation with my therapist or with my peers where like sometimes people are a bit thrown when I go, look, I'm going through some crap. I need to chat. And sometimes that terrifies people because they're like, hold on a minute, you're the guy I talk to. And now you want me to sit down and do active listening with you? Are you mad? Like, you want me to sit down and not interrupt when you're telling me what you're going through? And then being able to siphon out the individuals who can. And I say that because through my coaching, through the mentoring I've done over the years, a big part of what I've done, look, I can sit here all day, every day and talk strategy. I can talk decisive thinking. I can walk you through a P&L. I can talk systemic thinking and technologies. I can do that all day long. That's not a problem because that's what I've immersed myself in. But the bit to your point is like, why are you not making that decision on the spot? Or why are you afraid to make that decision? And then when I start to unravel that stuff and we start to talk about family life, we start to talk about how you grew up and you have overachieved because you are dyslexic or dyspraxic. And even in your 30s and 40s, when you're going out and having a conversation, your parents are still saying to you, oh, were you able to keep up? Did you manage to do that stuff? That sticks in your head until you start to unravel it. And so then when you start to play out and act up, what you're doing is you're not taking it out on the person in front of you. You literally are taking it out on your parents. You literally are taking it out on those teachers or those adults or all those individuals who didn't believe in you in the same way you wanted to. And so you react, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to prove them wrong. And we end up proving them wrong, yes, in a way, but then we end up mashing ourselves up because we get stressed. We get over anxiety. We have mad depression. And, in the worst case scenarios, many men take their lives because it's just too much for them. And so for me, that bit about recognizing the rescuing bit was so powerful because it made me see it in other people as well. And I wasn't going to go in there to do some therapeutic diagnostic. I keep that separate from my coaching. But it really does make you aware. I know I'm going off on an angle here, but I remember, again, at the time of recording, a few weeks ago, we had this massive I'm going to call it a Christian nationalist march in London, where loads of the largest one we've had, right? Largest right wing, whatever, 110 plus thousand men and women descending to London to talk about being British and being right. And, and lots of people and thought pieces were like, oh, racist and what. And my simple thing was, these people are grieving. Yeah. They're grieving. They've lost something. You imagine you are in a space where you have come from a traditional background of, say, manufacturing, or you are a breadwinner in some form or another. And all of a sudden you see, a migrant population coming in whose parents have told them, do not come home with anything less than an A, right? Why? we talk about 95%. Are you mad? Like, what happens to the other 5%?
Yeah.
And they may not have been brought up in that way. So you see these individuals who come in over years and they'll be in this space. They'll do really well. And all of a sudden you find yourself in the same space. And all those traditional industries where your parents were working for 25, 30 years does not exist anymore. And I understand that pain. I don't agree with the way that people react to it, but I really understand the pain of those men. And they're like, and then it's easy when you're in that space to then start believing all the conspiracy theories about you're being replaced. It's easy to be in that and have all the conspiracy theories that say to you that now, because you're heteronormative, anybody who's not and they're LGBT plus, it's a threat to the family. Mm-hmm. It's easy to be in those spaces and then tie up a way of how you believe your mythology or religion and find a scapegoat. And I look at that, and whilst I think there are some robust measures that need to happen in order to be able to confront that from both a political and economic position, I look at that and I go, you're really hurting. You are really hurting there, and you're grieving. I'm not the person to solve that, but I understand it, and I get why individuals who are in positions of power can play on that, especially as men, when you have been known, especially now when we know that women are getting more qualified than we ever were, when we know that women are going into positions of senior leadership that were once ring fenced by men. When you no longer have that safety net to fall in, of course you're going to get angry. And I, again, as I said, whilst I don't agree with it, I totally understand it. And so for me, it's unpicking that stuff that I think is really important. I know I blathered on a bit, but those are thoughts that came to mind.
No, really powerful, because as you said, there's the kind of proving of worth. And, you talked about the grieving and the hurt there. And I watch this, and I often say exactly the same thing you said a couple of times there. I say to people, I can understand anything if I choose to. I can stretch my mind to understand, because that's a cognitive exercise. I can understand. I can even have empathy for, right? But understanding is not the same as agreement. And sometimes often we kind of collapse those when we see these sorts of activities happening. But I wanted to touch on what you were kind of alluding to, the ring fencing that men used to experience around, leadership roles, or even the ring fencing that the men on the march, for instance, felt that of their livelihoods. And I guess this is all kind of connected to something we touched on before, was this kind of idea of like roles and even a man's role in the world and so forth. And what I have kind of observed is that, women have had this massive revolution, right? Sexual revolution, career revolution, life revolution. So they've gone from this like narrow band of what a woman does, stay at home, look after the kids, to encompassing the whole spectrum now. You want to be a working woman, you do that. You want to run a company, you do that. You want to just be a stay-at-home mom, great, do that. And all these things. But men, we still have this very narrow band of what we're able to do really in the world. If a man turns around to his friends and go, hey brothers, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad, no one's going to cheer him. Really, if we're really honest about it, we all kind of have a look at many stay-at-home dads, and we have this uneasy feeling about that. And I guess I wanted to connect this to how that leads men to kind of show up in their relationships, because, you know, you work with leaders of companies and businesses and thought leadership. How are you seeing those men change, or you've seen them change in their careers in relation to the way that they kind of show up in their kind of relationships and for their families?
Yeah. So it's a lot easier with the younger generation. So I'm going to say people who are probably under the age of 40, it's a lot easier to get through that thinking. Primarily because a lot of the narratives and the conversations around that kind of equality and positioning has been something that's been in the zeitgeist for a while. And I'm 56, so I'm kind of like speaking from my experience. Over 40 plus, it's tend to be a lot harder because there are people who are quite set in their ways around what their model of masculinity is. And I remember when me and my wife had our first child, so we were in just before 30. And I remember having a conversation with a group of guys, and they were like, I could never be with a woman that earns more money than me. And I was like, why? And they were like, no, it would literally like this just destroy my manhood. And I'm like, dude, my wife works in sales. She earns twice as much as me. All right. Straight talk. Brenda, I can go out and we can go and have a meal. I don't have to take out my wallet because like everything is good. I mean, to be fair, in our relationship, our money is our money, right? So that's how we've always seen it. But for a lot of those guys, they couldn't process it. And I was like, well, if you're on a trajectory, and if you say that you're with your partner and your whole ambition is to create this life together, where you have to take a part of you and she has to take a part of her, or, you know, if you're not heteronormative, if you're LGBT plus, you're with another partner, it's still a question of being able to find what that middle ground looks like. And again, as I say, this happened 26 years ago. There are still individuals I have conversations with who come from what I would say more traditional backgrounds, or sometimes even encumbered by variations of what religion they belong to, who are threatened by that. And I'm like, you're in a space where you can have more financial freedom than probably the parents or people that you had before, and you're worrying that your woman earns more than you. I'm like, you're a fool. Like, seriously, unless you're afraid that she's going to run away and catch up with some next man who can actually handle that, you are literally a fool. And for me, to your question, I find that it really does depend on the individual who I'm sitting in front of and their willingness to see that there are other options than maybe an entrenched idea that they have. And, you know, one of the beautiful things about coaching is that you can really ruffle people up by the right question. You answer them that right question, and that thing just like a surgeon's scalpel just goes straight through to the tendon, and like, ooh, okay, David. And that's why I love being able to write and talk and coach about this stuff, because I believe the more of us that are talking about this, the better. And, you know, the extremes are individuals who don't have that capacity to have that discussion or see that, or just see this singular model as to what masculinity looks like. They're always going to be frustrated. They're always going to be, I said to my wife, if you earn more than me, I'm happy. I'm just happy. She's like, you're just being a lazy ass guy there and go and get some money. But it's not an issue for me, because money's energy. Money's a tool. And if we start to attach all these meanings that don't really mean anything to it, then we've just become victims of capitalism. We've just become victims of popular culture, as opposed to men who have a sense of who they are, about what they're going to do and how they're going to, you know, like I made it a personal desire of mine that I wanted to see my kids when they were small. I wanted to be at sports days. I wanted to be at assemblies. I wanted to be in these spaces. And, you know, I was originally in a corporate career where I had to ask permission to go to a sports day. Like, brother, you mad? I'm going. When I turn up, the work will be done. Like, you know, I remember a boss saying to me, oh, you can't be out tomorrow. I'm like, I wasn't asking you permission. I'm just letting you know that I'm going to be in slightly later. Whatever meeting you got to adjust, you're going to adjust. I'm going to be at my kids' sports day and assembly. And I realized what I didn't want to do was to go through careers having this conversation with people all the time. And I just wanted to do it for myself. And working from home was a joy. Being able to pick up my kids and being an integral part of their life while they were morphing into the adults that they are now, priceless for me. Absolutely. And other people, they prefer to do it differently. And I've got no qualms with that. But I wasn't going to buy into a model that told me that if I was a stay-at-home dad, I was less than somebody who was going into work. Because truth be told, I was probably earning a lot more than some of the people who were rocking into London, and I had a lot less stress.
Yeah. And it's interesting you hear this, traditional model, a lot of men feel really uncomfortable with their partners earning more than their women earning more than them. Because it's still there, I still speak to men and it still bubbles under there. And in my experience of like unpicking that with men, usually comes down to roughly one thing, is that they feel their only worth is their ability to financially provide and their financial means or the amount of money they earn. And it's this kind of core feeling that if she earns more than he does, then she no longer needs him for anything. And then when we unpick it some more often, it comes down to, as men, we don't believe that who we are, our character, who we are as people, has any value. And our only value really comes in our ability to produce and create for others. And then that puts us in this kind of fragility and always having to kind of strive and prove. What do you kind of see? I'm interested in your thoughts on this, but also what you see as the antidote to that for men.
To your point, I believe it's reducing this reliance of your identity just being attached to some kind of outdated work model.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many different aspects. And again, we're talking primarily on a heteronormative lens here, but there are so many different aspects to a relationship that I think make it worthwhile. All right, I'm going to go off on a tangent, and I hope your listeners don't mind.
Please do.
But I say to a lot of men, like, do you know what the orgasm gap is? And they were like, what are you talking about? I'm like, do you know what the orgasm gap is? And they were looking at me. I'm like, listen, as a man, you probably just run in, you think you're the warrior, go in, you listen to all your R&B songs and what have you all night long, and bruv, you're out 2 minutes and you're cold, you're sleeping. The song ain't even got into the second verse and you're out, so don't even try it. And we have the banter about it, but I just said, but how many times have we been taught as men that our sexuality is prioritized? So, the male gaze is a priority. We'll see images of women. The way pornography is designed is predominantly around the male gaze and male dominance. And, there's so much of that narrative around sexuality, or even when we think about people who just think it should be just to create children. And, if we think about the rise of Christian nationalism in so many countries as well, they are like, right, women should be at home because we need to have more babies. We know it's because they're afraid that they're getting replaced by brown people, but that's a whole other conversation. That there's a weird narrative around, there's an intimacy and a love and a connection that so many traditional and indigenous practices and philosophies speak about, whether we are talking about the Kama Sutra or, different Sanskrit texts, or indigenous populations who just don't see it as a, right, we just got to create children. This is an expression of my soul connecting with you. And so I say to guys, I said, listen, it might take you twice as long, but take the time to make sure that your wife has a really good orgasm. I'm like, go out and buy some sex toys. I ain't buying no toy. I ain't having nobody completely weird. And I'm like, come on, bruv. Like, honestly, you could just sit back and relax. You don't have to energize. You don't have to what. You could be involved in the stuff without having. I'm not doing that. And I'm just saying, but if you've never been taught this stuff, you never know if there is a need that's being met. And there are times where you can be in a situation where that intimacy that your partner craves, you think just because you watch the one video online that you are meeting that need rather than having the conversation. And so lots of women have not had fulfilling sex within an actual relationship because men don't understand that. And so for me, that part of the relationship or the intimacy is quite important. Why don't men understand about that? Again, for those of us who are fathers, there is something around the depending on what psychological theory you speak to, detachment is usually from a mother, because a mother is the, the bonding or whatever. But not everybody has that. So what role do we play? And, I'm a firm believer that, I have my two children, my two daughters, natural born daughters, but I've got a wide family of individuals who will see me as a father figure, because I think it's important to be able to have that stuff. And I go, look, yeah, you can be in here, and but you can also be a father figure in the community. And so when I think about things like intimacy with your partner, fatherhood, when I think about that community responsibility, when I think about the ability to be able to share things like cooking, or even to be able to indulge in hobbies and art and all the rest of it, as there are so many things that we can bring that are more than money. Yes, in a capitalist world, we know that we need money and we know that we need to be able to sustain stuff. But the only reason why, well, not the only reason, one of the big reasons I believe a lot of men get threatened by that is because they're comparing themselves to someone else. And I'm like, if my wife's earning money and I can rock up to your house in a Lamborghini because she bought it, you think I'm vexed? Listen, she can drive it. I'm taking side seat. I'm bringing my peanuts with me as well. I'm sitting in that side seat and eating them salted cashews, all right? And a big part of it for me, again, is just re-examining what that manhood piece looks like. Because you can provide, but provision does not necessarily only limit it to work and money. You can provide emotional, spiritual, intellectual, social, physical. All those things you can provide as areas of well-being, in addition to or separate from financial, which are just as important. And for me, a lot of men, I believe, when we're having conversations, should see that bigger picture, other than, right, I've got to be the guy who's providing money. Security, there's a lot of times where a woman just wants to know that she's protected. She can go and do her stuff, but you're protecting. That, for many, is a lot more important than money. Knowing that that person feels protected from their mother-in-law, or a father-in-law, or a family member, or somebody being funny. That stuff is more important than money. And I think it's important to be able to recognize those as part of the wider picture.